Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this second session of our Bicentennial series celebrating the 200th birthday of the state of Missouri. I'm Lori Fan. I am Executive Director of Alumni Relations here at Missouri State University, and I'm really happy to welcome you all here today. Thank you so much for being with us. First, a little housekeeping. This session will be recorded, and we will send you a link shortly after the session, a couple of days, to tell you where to find that, as well as some additional resources that you may find of interest to you after the session is over. We encourage you to please ask questions along the way. Use that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen or top, depending on what device you're using. And you can ask those questions to any of our panelists at any time during the session. We will do our level best to get to each and every one of them, but we are on a limited time. So if we don't, please feel free to contact us or any of the panelists after the session. They will be providing you with some contact information as well. With that, it is my privilege and pleasure to introduce the president of Missouri State University, Cliff Smart. Welcome, Cliff.
Thank you, Lori. And thank all of you for joining us today. August 10th of this year will mark the 200th anniversary of Missouri's entry as the 24th state of the United States. Missouri State University is a member of the Bicentennial Alliance. That's a coalition of statewide nonprofit organizations and government agencies working together to develop and promote statewide projects commemorating the Missouri Bicentennial. Missouri State University is hosting a series of 7 publicly available webinars this year to explore and contemplate what's next for our state. Topics include agriculture, diversity and inclusion, educational trends, healthcare, Missouri caves, music, and technology. And we'll explore how Missouri State University and its partners will have an effect on the state today, tomorrow, and for decades to come. Today's program will focus on statewide, university, and local efforts to value the inclusion of diversity. The emphasis will be on higher education, particularly students of color, first-generation and Pell-eligible students as well. Governor Amy Counts will also discuss Missouri State University's special Bear Power program. We hope you enjoy today's program and invite you to join us for the entire series. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Lyle Foster. Dr. Foster is a diversity trainer, a member of Missouri State University faculty, and an entrepreneur. At age 16, he attended Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and later Brown and Yale universities for graduate school. He earned his doctorate in educational leadership at the University of Missouri, completing research on school accreditation in our state. At Missouri State University, Dr. Foster teaches classes in social problems, multicultural education, public sociology, diversity training, and more. He is a founder of Tough Talks and supports the Office of Diversity and Inclusion as one of our faculty trainers. Community educational excellence and empowerment and inclusion are some of the main drivers in Dr. Foster's life. He recently received the NAACP Drum Major Award for his work in developing the Springfield-Greene County African American Heritage Trail. He's also been recognized by the Springfield Business Journal and 417 magazine as 12 people you need to know, 100 influential leaders, and a 417 hero. In addition, Lyle recently received the Missouri State University Board of Governors Public Affairs Award. It's now my privilege to turn it over to Dr. Foster to lead our panel today. Lyle?
Thank you so much, President Smart. I feel a little embarrassed after that lengthy introduction. I could have certainly just used the very short one just to say I'm getting ready to come and moderate. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I am just so excited to be with you this afternoon and just thrilled that Missouri State is taking this leadership role and with this very important topic today. I want to just say thank you for being with us on this very beautiful spring day, at least it is in Springfield. And we're looking forward to getting into this very great and appropriate topic. Thank you for making this time a part of your afternoon today. We will have a time of questions and answers at the end of our panelists' presentations today. The role of Missouri State University and the history of the state of Missouri are considered by many to be integral in the recognition of the role of diversity in higher education. As a matter of fact, over the last 2 years in particular, the state of the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development has promoted access to higher education for underrepresented and under-resourced populations. We are delighted to have such an esteemed panel today. And panelists, thank you so much for being part of this afternoon as well, including the Commissioner of Higher Education, Zora Mulligan, the Chairperson of the Board of Governors for Missouri State University, Amy Counts, and Mr. Wes Pratt, Chief Diversity Officer and Assistant to the President for Missouri State University. In setting up our conversation today, we'd like to quickly review a few slides that are going to cover some terms in terms of just preparing and understanding some of the terminology we will be referencing this afternoon. So I won't spend a lot of time because I think these are words that we're all very familiar with, but we use them today in the context of having some shared understanding that we're saying and understanding something pretty similar. So I want to make it very abundantly clear that when we talk about diversity today, we really mean diversity in terms of its broadest context. So many times people think of diversity as really something that has to only do with race and ethnicity, but particularly here at Missouri State, and in our conversation this afternoon, we mean it in terms of individual differences, which will be personality, learning styles, and life experiences, those group and social differences, race, ethnicity, class, sexual orientation, age, country of origin, religion, and all other affiliations, because at the end of the day, the goal is to have all of this engaged in the service of learning. Our next term that we just want to reference will be cultural competence. And in Missouri State University, Bear Land, this is very important to us because it's one of the 3 pillars of our public affairs mission as a public affairs university. So for cultural competence, there are 4 main components: awareness, attitude, knowledge, and skills. The outcome of cultural competence is really having those observable and measurable practices that support and promote inclusion. We do want to caution, though, that we don't probably ever reach what we would call the plateau of being cultural competence, because it's really a process that we are engaged in throughout our lifestyle as identities, as understanding of our cultural awareness. They actually change and develop as groups identify themselves and as we become more aware as a society of one another. So that leads us to the 3rd term that we'll look at this afternoon, which is cultural consciousness. And this term has gotten into what I would call increased popularity. And this refers really to a skill set. So rather than being an endpoint in itself in terms of cultural competence, this is really a skill set that results in the fostering of critical awareness and inclusion of oneself, of others in the world. So as a result, we engage in a regular process of self-assessment, learning, and developing skills to flexibly and effectively navigate a complex world of diverse others. So we might think of today as an opportunity to value and improve our cultural consciousness, because the reality is we're always learning, we're always growing, and we're always developing greater awareness of one another. So again, thank you for being part of this afternoon. Let's begin our conversation today with Commissioner Zora Mulligan. And thank you so much first for Commissioner for the great work that you're doing on behalf of all of us in the state of Missouri. Your work and your leadership is so appreciated. A couple of years ago, Commissioner, you were involved in an effort to promote the inclusion of diversity, known as the Missouri Equity Project. Could you share with us, Commissioner Mulligan, what is the MEP, why it was created, and who were the players in developing this effort to promote access for students of color, first generation, and Pell Grant eligible students? And if you don't mind, Commissioner, I'll also set up the second question. If you need me to come back to it, I'm happy to do that. And then out of these efforts, I understand, came the Missouri College Access Network, which we know of as MOCAN. What is MOCAN and what does it do? Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Absolutely. So first, I just want to acknowledge what a pleasure it is to take part in this conversation, and especially to do so in partnership with my friends at Missouri State. I'm a kid who grew up in the Ozarks and maybe was part of a group of kids who didn't have such a strong probability of going to and succeeding in college. And for me, Missouri State University, then SMS, really represented both diversity and opportunity. Like a lot of high school students around the Ozarks, I spent quite a bit of time on the campus of Missouri State University through choir and debate and other activities. And it really gave me and kids like me who might not otherwise have seen themselves on a college campus a chance to see ourselves literally on a college campus. So I actually ended up at Drury University rather than at SMS at the time, but I still had a lot of friends at Missouri State. And again, I just have always thought of it as such a kind of a beacon of vibrancy and diversity in the Ozarks and in Missouri. I have such a clear memory of walking from my residence hall at Drury over to visit friends in Freudenberger Hall at Missouri State. And I can tell you that in 1994, Freddie was a world away, not just a couple of miles away from Smith Hall at Drury. It was just all kinds of different students doing all kinds of different things. And it was a great example of all the different ways that students can be successful in college. So that kind of biography aside, I just wanted to talk a little bit about our equity work in the context of our department as a whole. So our department has a vision, which is every Missourian empowered with the skills and education needed for success. And that word every is very, very important to us. We know that in order for Missouri to succeed as a state, people of all ages, of all races with different abilities and from different parts of the state need to be able to access and succeed in post-secondary education. There is great work happening at colleges and universities across the state in terms of increasing student success for underrepresented students in particular. When I think about the times I've been on Missouri State's campus and had opportunities to learn about the kind of work you're doing, some examples that come to mind are your excellent, excellent work that focuses on first generation students, your partnership with the Student African American Brotherhood, and just the basic and fundamental shift of making inclusive excellence a core institutional value. That is really, really phenomenal work. We see our role at the state as kind of understanding what all of the individual institutions are doing, and then taking a step back to zoom out and understanding the impact of all of those different institution efforts are having on achieving our state's goals in terms of post-secondary education. And so that is kind of been the focus of the Equity Project. I'll ask you to wave your hand, Lyle, if I'm talking too long, but just a little bit of detail about the Equity Project. We really view our role in three ways. So one, we think it's important that our role in sharing data is used as part of this. Our role as a convener of people who are working on this issue around the state is also really critical. And then using our position to evaluate the success of efforts that we've led at the state level has been another important part of the Equity Project. The kinds of people who came together to partner with us on the Equity Project really, I think, reflect the significance of this work at the state level and the extent to which people across the state care about this effort. So, we had people from college campuses who work on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We had faculty members who their day job might not be on diversity issues, but they care really passionately about it, who were engaged. Business and industry was also a very strong voice in the Equity Project. Our state chamber has been a really wonderful partner. And then last but not least, we had a lot of nonprofit engagement because there are a lot of excellent private organizations that are doing good work, either as the funders of work that improves equity or as the people who are actually doing the work. And so some of the names that are kind of in our friend universe, the Kauffman Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, which is a national level organization, Urban League of St. Louis and Kansas City, the Community Foundation of the Ozarks, these have all really been important contributors to the Equity Project. In terms of the contributors, I also want to give a huge shout out to our team at the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. We've got a great group of people who wake up every day thinking about what we can do to increase access and success for diverse students. And the Equity Project really started with their passion and their commitment, and it's allowed us to continue and grow over the last 2 years. I'll talk a little bit about each of the components of the Equity Project. I mentioned data sharing. It sounds really boring, but it's a very important part of what we do as a state agency. We collect and provide a lot of information about what happens in terms of student success at different schools around the state, Traditionally, that role has been posting like a spreadsheet that allows people to use that to kind of understand the universe. The Equity Project kind of took that another level and started doing annual reports and white papers that puts that data into context, but also starts to tell the story around the data. So not just in terms of where the gaps are, but where the successes are and what's the voice of the students and the practitioners who are working to make things better. So data sharing is a big part of the Equity Project. Bringing people together to share best practices is another really important part of what we do. In 2019, we did the state's first annual Equity Summit. Obviously, everything looked different in 2020. And so rather than having one big long event, we've broken that into a series of webinars. And so we're having a conversation over the course of the year that I'm really proud to say has actually increased in participation as the year has rolled forward. So it's been a really great opportunity. We also, finally, we use the Equity Project as a framework to evaluate our department's initiatives and to understand how our work affects diverse student groups. So in Missouri, we're working toward a big goal of having 60% of Missourians have a degree or certificate by 2025. And we've led efforts to improve graduation rates and remove barriers to success in partnerships with institutions around the state. What we have learned through the Equity Project is that those efforts have had a huge and significant impact, not only on students overall, but particularly on diverse students throughout Missouri. And so if you just look at like one of the big picture, big goals, increasing retention and graduation rates, each individual institution has done a lot of work on its own and in partnership with our department. And so if you look back to where we were 5 years ago compared to where we were today, public universities are graduating 14% more students. Community colleges are graduating 9% more students than they were 5 years ago. And especially significant graduation rates for minority and underrepresented students have increased by 22.4%, which is tremendous. So that's a lot. I could talk about this for 2 hours instead of 20 minutes. You can tell that I'm passionate about this work, but I can tell you that you can find more information about any of the topics that I just addressed. If you go to, if you search for Missouri Equity Project, you can find the information. So I can roll into your next question, Lyle, or you can ask it to me directly.
Okay, so this is essentially talking about the Missouri College Access Network, MOCAN. Essentially, what is MOCAN and what does it do? Well, let me first just comment, I didn't know that you were a debater and a singer. And I also really appreciate your sharing those memories of jury and what many people still refer to as SMS. So, but thank you. You have shared some very powerful initiatives and critical things for our state. I've actually had the honor of working on several of those projects. So thank you so much, Commissioners. Yes, if you can just talk a little bit about MOCAN, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'll take a pause just to raise a Diet Coke to late Missouri State Choral Director Guy Webb, who was such an important figure for people throughout the Ozarks and throughout Missouri who were part of the choir community. I was sad to see his death and just wanted to remark on it and say that he was a person of influence to me when I was growing up and thinking about what I wanted to be when I grow up. So thank you. So MOCAN, the Missouri College Access Network, kind of came into being at about the same time that we were having this statewide equity project conversation. There was a lot of overlap in the people that we were working with through the equity project and people who were thinking about how to form a nonprofit that might support equity and student success work throughout the state. So MOCAN is really, at least first and foremost, the brainchild of a person who not many people know. There is an organization in Missouri called MOHELA, which operates in the student loan space. MOHELA's longtime executive director, Ray Baer, has been the driving force behind the formation of MOCAN and has really not only committed to it with his heart, but has committed significant financial resources that are going to allow MOCAN to be a powerful voice in Missouri. So again, about the same time, there was a group of us that was getting together to start thinking about what MOCAN would look like, and a group that was getting together around the equity project. And there was a lot of overlap in terms of the nonprofit leaders, the state government leaders, and the practitioners. And so it's been a great conversation. MOCAN was formally established a couple of years ago, and it has a mission that really focuses on advocacy, so advocating for policies that promote access and success, coordinating statewide career preparation and success activities for service providers, connecting providers, centralizing knowledge sharing, identifying and helping kind of standardize data collection, and then just fostering a collective voice for all to learn about the value of post-secondary education. Clearly, there's a lot of overlap in what I just described our department's role being and what MOCAN is doing. And so our teams meet regularly to talk about ways that we can work together and complement each other's vision and mission, and really use it to lift up students throughout the state of Missouri.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Again, that work is so important and it's vital to really addressing those issues of inclusion and equity in our state. And so thank you again for what you're doing. We're looking forward to our next panelist and just so thrilled that you're with us, Governor Counts. We understand that you are not only are the chairperson for the Missouri State University Board of Governors this year, but you have made history as the first African-American female to be nominated and selected in that position. So we want to extend a very heartfelt and sincere congratulations to you on this very important role you're playing in our university and in our community and state. I think I've got one basic question for you, but it has a lot of components for you, Governor Counts. How has Missouri State University worked to develop and implement efforts that value the inclusion of diversity? Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. I'm excited to have the opportunity to chair the board, as you know, to serve my alma mater, which was SMS at the time. I am a recipient of a diversity award. So I was able to receive that for the 4 years, which helped obviously with my college education. So it's really, really a great opportunity to come back and help, and then also work with the university on scholarship programs to further educate. I also look forward to the fall being a little bit more normal. We have discussed that at the board meeting and have given our backing to President Smart as well as the faculty and staff on that. So as you know, the university's mission is to educate students to be global citizen scholars committed to public affairs. So with that in mind, the university has recognized the need to establish diversity and excellence and inclusion, and made it a core value, and went further by adding 4 key performance indicators to the most recent long-range plan, which was 2016 to 2021. Those 4 key performance indicators include enrollment, student success, the quality of learning, and then the faculty and staff. Beyond that, Missouri State has initiated numerous diversity, equity, inclusion efforts for the campus, as well as promoting it in the general community to obviously value the rich diversity that all Missouri State University stakeholders have, including the students, faculty, and alumni. One of the programs that I like to talk about, which is one of our inclusive programs that President Smart mentioned earlier, is Bear Power, and power representing the acronym for Promoting Opportunities for Work, Education, and Resilience. It's a program that's a post-secondary education program, opportunity for students with intellectual and development disabilities transitioning out of high school. So the students work alongside Missouri State student volunteers who basically become their mentors, engage with them both academically and socially. They live on campus. And this program recently received a donation, which is going to allow it to expand. Currently, it's a 2-year, 5-semester program. We had the opportunity at our last board meeting in February to hear from some of the students. And it was the most powerful thing, to quite honestly, to sit there and hear how they feel being a part of the university community and to feel accepted. So I think that that's a real testament to the opportunity to bring these types of programs to the university, and it really expanding everybody's, as you know, cultural consciousness. College Magazine actually recognized the university in August of this past year as one of the top 10 universities for students with disabilities in 2020. So again, a true testament to what strides we're making. But on a broader scale, we've had climate studies been implemented to take place every 3 years to make sure that we're addressing those things that need to be addressed. Our annual action plan also has measures to identify and track the success of our diversity, inclusion, and equity efforts, and the plans are adapted and approved by our administrative council, the president's council, as well as the board of governors. So some examples of those initiatives for this current academic year that the faculty and staff will be presenting to us additional enhanced intervention strategies for the university's bias response team to concentrate on areas of incidents of bias involved in race or other protected class that occur on campus or between the university community. The facility expansion of the Multicultural Resource Center, which is going to be in the Plaster Student Union. The expanded diversity and equity inclusion training opportunities for students and employees in the external community, which I think Mr. Pratt will be going into further. The athletic department has instituted a diversity in education initiative. So we are obviously reviewing and modifying the university policies and procedures to make sure that there's ensure equal opportunity throughout the university system. And then, just the continuation of developing internal and external partnerships to promote diversity, equity, inclusion at all, at the university and the broader community.
Thank you so much, Governor Counts. And we really value and appreciate your leadership during a very challenging and difficult time. And really because of your leadership and President Smart, Missouri State seems to be forging through a very challenging pandemic. So thank you for that. And I'm sure all of our Bear community is looking forward to a fall that hopefully will be more familiar in terms of its more normal activities and academic experiences. So thank you again, Governor Counts. That last point you made in the action plan about internal and external partnerships to promote DEI at the university and in the broader community is something that our Chief Diversity Officer, Mr. H. West Pratt, has been involved in for some time. And we really appreciate all of the wonderful contributions and very valuable leadership that Mr. Pratt has brought to our campus, our community, and our state. But before I engage Mr. Pratt, I would like to show you how integral one area of diversity, and that is race, has been in the history of not only the United States and the state of Missouri, but also at Missouri State University. And why now, at a critical time in our history, we need to have the value and the inclusion of diversity, particularly in higher education, as well as in our general communities. We're going to be looking at just a few slides that will help to set the backdrop for Mr. Pratt and also help us in our conversation this afternoon around diversity and inclusion. I think many of you will recognize this beautiful setting. It's not in the Show Me state, but it's in our neighboring state, Arkansas. So this is something that we often utilize in our Facing Racism training presentations. And this is actually looking along the Buffalo River. And what we've done is juxtapose this timeline. This timeline may be in fact familiar for many of you. You may have seen it in some publications and periodicals as you read and work on your cultural competence and cultural consciousness. But it's important to kind of notice in the history of our nation how significant and how extended the period of slavery has been in our nation. And so what our point is with putting this against the Buffalo River, this beautiful picture, is that in the bedrock, we can tell a lot of things about who we are. Archaeologists will oftentimes, dig into the rock and they can tell what animals, what the history was like, what the glaciers did hundreds of years ago. And so we're saying when we talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, it can be important, it can be extremely useful to look in the soil of our nation, look in the history of our institutions and see what it's there. And so one of the things that we notice, of course, is that American slavery as an institution has had a significant portion of the history of our entire nation. In fact, on this timeline, that's really the longest piece of history from that kind of context. And then we see the period of segregation and what this timeline describes as mass incarceration. So let's share this with you as a way to think about what this has meant. And now we're going to look at how Missouri State and the history of our state actually ties into these important timelines. And we're not going to go through each one of these particular periods, but I will just kind of note a few things on this timeline, because in a way, what we're doing is seeing where our state was and where our university was while these things were taking place in the general nation's history. So I think you'll see the Trail of Tears, for example, going through our state in 1838. You'll see the establishment of the Teachers College, which of course today is our great Missouri State University, but that was established in 1905. Look at 1919, the Red Summer, when we had major anti-Black riots in US cities. We'll see the passage of the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King Jr. being assassinated in 1968. We'll see the Black Lives Matter campaign in 2013. And then 2017 in terms of the FBI's report around US hate groups. And obviously, how do these things affect our institutions? How do they affect our university and our larger communities? And then the final slide, we'll kind of look at some of the things of significant events as recently as 2020, which of course is in the middle of the pandemics that we're still experiencing. And we describe these as two pandemics, one around COVID-19, which has changed our world in ways that we've never imagined, and the pandemic of BIPOC and racism. And so these things have had an astronomical effect on all of us in many ways. Worldwide protests in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. And then of course, Black Lives Matter protests in Springfield, resulting in the largest march in our city's history with an estimated 5,000 participants. So these are things that we think about as we have this conversation. So what is this impact on our students, on our administration, on our faculty, our staff, and just in terms of our community and our state as a whole? We're thrilled that Mr. Pratt is going to share some of the community collaborations that Missouri State has been engaged in since you've become the Chief Diversity Officer. And please, we'd like to add, Mr. Pratt, that our campus and broader community are particularly appreciative of your efforts and leadership at this critical time in our nation's history. I believe Mr. Pratt is going to discuss and share with us many of those community collaborative efforts that Missouri State has been engaged in and that he has had the pleasure of being the leader for. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Foster. It's a pleasure to be with you. I was sharing with Commissioner Mulligan in one of our pre-meetings the fact that I'm a native Springfieldian. I too went to Drury University, Drury College back in the day, but was very much involved in what was going on, particularly during the civil rights movement with Missouri State. Back then it was SMS. And so it's kind of interesting that I've come full circle from my personal and my professional life to a position where I've been able to work with the Board of Governors, the Administrative Council, President Smart, as well as the larger community. And being a native Springfieldian, I am particularly enamored and particularly pleased with the efforts that have been undergone, certainly since I graduated from college. And I might add that one of the programs, the Facing Racism Institute that Dr. Foster facilitates and Dr. Leslie Anderson facilitates, was actually a program that was brought to Springfield by the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce. And it was actually modeled after the Racial Healing Institute, which was a part of the Grand Rapids, Michigan Chamber of Commerce. And we've actually incorporated it here, but in 2010, the Chamber of Commerce brought it to Missouri State. To Springfield, and I happen to be in the first cohort of individuals. And so the Facing Racism Institute is designed to identify what racism is, how do we mitigate racism, understanding the history of racism, so that we have this awareness of the challenges that we're facing on a national level, and sometimes even on a worldwide level. So the Chamber of Commerce sponsored this for a number of years, maybe about 5 years. We then moved the Facing Racism Institute to Missouri State. We've had over 500 graduates who have been the business, corporate, public entity leaders, nonprofit, faith-based leaders of this community who've actually participated in either the one-day session or the two-day sessions that we sponsor each year. So we're particularly enamored of that. I'd also like to mention that over the last year, particularly our Administrative Council, our Academic Leadership Council, the Springfield Public School District, administrators, directors, and principals have also participated along with the city of Springfield in the Facing Racism training. So we're particularly enamored and proud of the efforts to promote the value of inclusion by understanding sometimes the significance of racism and its impacts. Another effort that has that the community is engaged in, particularly in the leadership of the mayor of Springfield, as well as Council Member Ferguson, Phyllis Ferguson, was the establishment of the Mayor's Equity and Equality Task Force that has been put in place to address the issues that were so pervasive during this past summer, whether it was George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, the Breonna Taylor situation in Louisville. A group of our leaders decided that we had to address those particular issues, and so they've pulled together a task force to look at how can we effectively deal with some of the issues of racism and the mitigation of racism throughout our community. Another area was the Public Entities Diversity Work Group. This has been a group that's been in place for a number of years now, and they've established a performance measures subcommittee as well as a diversity outreach, recruitment, and retention committee that deals with the employment of folks in our public entities. We have city utilities, the city of Springfield, Greene County, OTC, even Drury University as a private university is a part of that effort. And looking at some of the ways that we can increase contracting, consulting, procurement opportunities with minority and women-owned businesses, as well as the employment opportunities in all of our public entities throughout the region. Commissioner Mulligan also mentioned the Student African American Brotherhood, which is now established here. The national headquarters is here at Missouri State, downtown on the public square, and our Park Central office building. And we're particularly impressed with that group because many of the students who have participated in it, it's more of a peer mentoring group, have participated in that program. Over 86% of those students who participate in that program generally graduate and move on to either higher education or careers in which they are making a difference in this society. And so that national organization, Student African American Brotherhood, which is a very diverse group of individuals. It's not only relegated to African American students, but also to white, Latino, Asian, multiracial, and just students who are willing to sort of hold each other accountable and move each other up that ladder to success, academic success and career success. So we're particularly excited that they moved here to Missouri State over the last year. Another effort that we've been involved in that the community has come together in is the SPS, Equity and Diversity Community Advisory Council. As you may have read recently, the new superintendent of the Springfield Public School District will be an African-American female, and that's historical in its own right, but it's also a testament to the fact that the school district has been moving to promote the value of inclusion for a number of years now, and we're excited about the prospects for the future. The president of the university, President Smart, has a President's Community Leadership Diversity Council. And so there are various leaders throughout the community who are involved in what we're doing in Missouri State. We update them and brief them on what we're doing for everything from activities on our campus, certainly to the Collaborative Diversity Council, which has been in place for 7 years. Last year, unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to have our conference. This year, we're going to do it virtually. And we're bringing back Irshad Manji, who is the creator and founder of the Moral Courage Project. And we're going to be featuring her in how to build a culture of inclusion, particularly how do we revive dialogue in a time of deep division. And so we're excited about that. And we're excited about some of the other things that we're doing here at Missouri State University. Another effort that's led by Dr. Juan Maraz is our United Academy for Inclusion and Belonging. The United Way of the Community Foundation of the Ozarks and Missouri State have teamed up. And over the last couple of months, we've actually been providing diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development for members of our nonprofit community organizations, from higher education. Our police department has been involved as well. And so we're particularly excited about that. Our last 2 sessions will be this week. And Dr. Maraz has done an exceptional job in creating a professional development component that values the inclusion of diversity. I believe someone mentioned the African American Heritage Trail, the Springfield Greene County African American Heritage Trail that Dr. Lyle Foster was instrumental um, in doing the research on. And that was particularly gratifying to me as an individual, as a native son of Springfield, Missouri, because I actually grew up in this community. And you know, some years ago, the community of Springfield was not as supportive, was not as engaging with particularly populations of color, underrepresented populations, under-resourced populations. And since I've been back in Springfield since 2007, I've actually seen not only members of the business and the corporate community, but our public entities, our faith-based organizations, our nonprofit organizations have taken a role in promoting the value of inclusion in large measure with partnership with Missouri State. And so I appreciate the leadership from the Board of Governors. I appreciate the leadership from President Smart and Administrative Council in championing these efforts to create that core value of inclusive excellence that we're so excited about and so gratified to see. Sure, we know things are not as we would wish to be. As a native Springfieldian, I was involved years ago in the civil rights movement. I understand the Black Lives Matter movement, and sometimes things get politicized. But the bottom line is basically valuing the inclusion of diversity through inclusive excellence, so that we value the rich diversity that all of us bring to the table. And so hopefully we can continue to build on that. And finally, I might add that probably Missouri State was one of the first public entities to have a chief diversity officer. We had an interim chief diversity officer who was Dr. Leslie Anderson. Then we had the vice president for diversity and inclusion. And then in 2016, I was appointed as the assistant to the president, chief diversity officer here. And so we have kept that ball moving down the field. And we know sometimes that progress can be deliberative, progress can be slow. You sometimes take one step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 3 steps forward, moonwalk back, whatever it may be. But the city of Springfield, the Greene County, and certainly Missouri State and our partners in the business corporate sector, in the nonprofit sector, in our faith-based organizations are continuing to move the ball forward. As a matter of fact, a number of institutions, Drury University, which is my alma mater, has a chief diversity officer. The Ozarks Community Technical College just appointed a chief diversity officer. Community Partnership of the Ozarks has established a CDO, as well as Borough Health, the Springfield Public School District. City of Springfield is in the process of hiring a diversity officer, and Bass Pro and even O'Reilly Automotive, a young man by the name of Jerry Williams is just relocating his family to Springfield, Missouri with O'Reilly Automotive. So the impact of our efforts to promote the value of inclusion are felt not only in higher education, felt not only in the public school system or in the public with our public entities. It's felt with our business and our corporate community as well, and we're excited about that. And so I commend all of us who are working and laboring in these venues to promote the value of inclusion. We understand that we're talking about not compositional approaches, not just programs or projects. We're talking about changing the institutional culture of Missouri State, changing the community culture of our city of Springfield and Greene County. So we value what everybody brings to, whether it's making a profit, whether it's public education, whether it's higher education. That is the mission of the efforts that not only the state has been involved in, and Missouri State has been involved in, but our larger community. And so we're pleased. We know we have still much work to do, but I must admit, as a native Springfieldian, as a native of the state of Missouri, I am particularly proud of the efforts that all of us are making to promote the value of inclusion throughout the state. Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. It's very, very clear that you and many others are making a tremendous difference in our community. I want to just remind all of us again, and thank you so much for your participation. Missouri and Missouri State University, a shared past, a vision for the future, valuing the inclusion of diversity. I really do hope that all of you who are part of this wonderful opportunity this afternoon are feeling challenged or learning, and really also appreciating the work that's being done in our community at Missouri State University and throughout our state in terms of working towards diversity, inclusion, and equity. So I would like to thank our panelists, Commissioner Zora Mulligan, Ms. Amy Counts, Chairperson of the Missouri State University Board of Governors, and Mr. H. West Pratt, CDO at Missouri State University, for their insightful perspectives and their actions and what it means to value the inclusion of diversity in higher education and our respective communities. There has been a lot of very, very important information that's shared, and it's very clear that all of you are on the front line of making this work count and doing this important work in our communities. We like to share some of the questions that have been posed to the panelists at this time. And Commissioner Mulligan, I think this first question may be for you and anyone else who wants to tackle it. So this question is about the money, and I've got one or two more for you, and I've got some other questions for the other panelists. But someone is asking, what is the average salary for teachers in the great state, the show me state of Missouri?
Oh, I apologize. I don't have the answer to that question. I can talk about the software and metrics we use to evaluate efforts and success of the equity project.
We've got that question too.
All right. I apologize. I can get you that information, but I don't have it on the tip of my tongue.
That's perfectly fine, Commissioner. Because there was a question about what kind of evaluation we have in terms of metrics of software, particularly in terms of the equity project.
Absolutely. So I can explain a little bit about my not having a firm number for faculty or for teacher salaries. I'm the commissioner of higher education, and there is a separate commissioner of K-12 education. And so she's a person who lives and breathes teacher salaries. But for me, it's an issue that I'm interested in, but not as aware of on a daily working basis. In terms of the tools that we use to think about the equity project, as a state, we do have performance measures that we use to look at the performance of institutions. They're informational and not linked to funding, but they still matter. For those, for the most part, we look at the participation and success of Pell students. And that was the product of a long debate about the best way to really think about the success of kind of vulnerable students. So we don't have measures that are linked specifically to rural or minority students, but we do pay a lot of attention to students who receive Pell grants. In terms of the software that we use, this is actually a good question, and I could talk about it for much longer than anybody else is interested. I mentioned that, initially as a state, we did a lot of work by just sharing Excel spreadsheets, and that's of interest to a very narrow segment of people. And it also is really hard to slice and dice that data in a way that provides meaningful information about individual institutions or particular groups of students at each institution. And so we're moving toward adoption of Tableau for all of that, which will make it it will make it much easier for people who are kind of experts and data people to understand what's happening. But our understanding of our general audience is that we need to provide a really compelling report that provides some basic information, charts that are easy to understand and that have context. And in the future, we'll even be moving kind of further away from having a big, lengthy kind of academic report to something that's more presentation oriented. And makes for better chunks and smaller conversations through social media and other presentations.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate your answers. The next question is probably for anybody who wants to take it on. And I'm probably looking at President Smart as well. What directions can you give in terms of guidance for creating D&I initiatives in the workplace? What guidance, what directions can you give for creating D&I initiatives in the workplace?
Well, I'll start, but I would encourage Wes and Lyle to jump in as well. My goal is for every student and every employee to be successful. On the student side, you want every student all along the political spectrum of all backgrounds, of all races and colors and religions and and disability status, veteran status. You want everyone to find a place and feel that the university is home, that they're welcome here, and that they can be successful here. So we also think about that in terms of our faculty, right? How can our faculty and staff be successful at the university? And often faculty and staff of color have additional obstacles they have to overcome to achieve that. Lyle, I think you would be well equipped to talk about that. Because often faculty like Dr. Foster take on extra responsibilities in helping students of color and mentoring them. And so one of the things we've started this year is a faculty mentoring program where any faculty member working through that tenure process, new to the university, can have assigned a faculty member outside their department who has volunteered to kind of help them navigate the world that is higher education. Dr. Judith Martinez is leading that effort. It's a new effort this academic year, and it's been very successful. Lyle, what would you add to that?
Thank you, President Smart. I would just underscore the importance of this sense of, when we talk about inclusion, it really means everybody feels like they belong, and that belonging is so significant. And I think people today are really saying, particularly those that may be faculty or staff in a great place like Missouri State, despite the economy, people oftentimes have choices. So people want to be able to bring their best selves to the workplace, and that means all of their identities, whether that's their religious identity, their sexual orientation, whether that's their race and ethnic identity. They want to feel like they can show up and be their full selves, because the work that we do, in this case, in a university setting, it's demanding work. So you want to feel like when you're going to do this work, you're going to work for tenure and promotion and all these other things, that you can enjoy the experience. You can essentially enjoy the ride. And oftentimes we find that historically, and that's why we showed that timeline, our institutions, and not only just Missouri State, but throughout the nation, they weren't always created for today's workforce. And so sometimes we have to make adjustments. We have to recognize the demands, the requirements today have changed significantly. So how do we welcome people and make sure they know that they're welcome? So all of these initiatives that Mr. Pratt has talked about, the things that Governor Counts has talked about, even the things that Commissioner Mulligan has talked about, those are things that we're doing to make sure that people understand that they're important, that they have a place, and that their work is valued and respected. And I really believe Missouri State has made significant strides in those areas. And some of the initiatives, like you said, the faculty mentoring, they're very, very important. And I think it also means that, we're looking at our curriculum, we're looking at our programs, we're looking at our overall environment and making sure that people can see themselves reflected in the larger institution. So maybe we'll just stop there because we've got some more questions, but that's really a very valuable question. The second part of that, and maybe somebody can speak to this as well, is kind of how do you implement that? And so we've talked a little bit about that in terms of some of the initiatives, Mr. Pratt, but I just wanted that person to know that that was asked. This is another question, Mr. Pratt and other panelists, could you speak more to the connection between improving the overall cultural climate in Springfield and our ability to make our campus supportive for faculty, staff, and students with marginalized identities? And maybe this might be the uniqueness of this question. Can we make progress in one area without making progress in the other? And how can we on the campus do a better job of working on inclusion off campus?
Okay, I'll try to address that. You know, what's critically important is having a sense of connectivity. And I think there are many things that are going on in Springfield that a lot of folks may not even be aware of. And certainly when you're recruiting people from diverse backgrounds, whatever that diversity may be, you need to be aware of what is happening in Springfield or in the business and the corporate sectors or in the nonprofit sectors. And so the work of our city of Springfield and city utilities with the Public Entities Diversity Work Group and their subcommittees, that's critically important to know. I can recall, having a conversation, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with the new Chief Diversity Officer from O'Reilly Automotive, who is relocating his family here. And he actually sought me out. I had no idea O'Reilly was moving in that direction. And he actually contacted me because of some of the work that we've been doing. But that connectivity is critically important. So I've met with him on a couple of occasions. He actually participated in our Facing Racism training with our legal, with our general counsel's office. I invited him to participate in that, and he came over and spent the day. He's been to Queen City Soul Kitchen. He's met some of the folks within the community, the business community, that he could connect with when he brings his wife to look for a home. We want to make sure that they're connected. Told him about minorities in business, told him about what the NAACP is doing. Again, what Missouri State and the Chamber of Commerce is one of the sponsors and collaborators on our Collaborative Diversity Conference. All of that makes a difference in that connectivity. Also from the perspective of the entities who, many people are aware of the so-called reputation of the perspective or the perceptions that Springfield may have from a historical perspective. And many of the folks in the Chamber of Commerce, they've done some studies in the past and where they may have lost some folks businesses moving into Springfield because of the so-called lack of diversity. Well, the demographic changes that are occurring now, and certainly there's going to be pushback, there's going to be resistance to that. But the reality is change is in the offing. And so it's like that connectivity is critically important. So if you're recruiting diverse employees, you need to be aware of what's going on in Springfield that might be of interest to them. And you also need to connect those individuals to folks within the larger community as well. Many of our students, particularly students of color, they used to come to Missouri State and think, hey, as soon as I get my degree in my 4, 5, 6 years, I'm out of here. Now, because of the emphasis of many folks, the business sector, the financial sector, of trying to recruit diverse employees, they're now looking at Springfield as a place, well, I spent 4 to 6 years here, why not have a career here? And so we've been able to tap into students who are from diverse backgrounds, under-resourced backgrounds, and whether they're from rural communities or from the urban areas, to get them connected to Springfield. And so that makes a difference. But
Thank you.
Your folks who are recruiting need to know that.
So thank you so much, Mr. Pratt. I hear that word engagement through all of that. Commissioner Mulligan, I know, has a hard stop at 1. So in case we don't get back to you, Commissioner, thank you so much. I know you've got a very, very busy day. We appreciate for including us as part of that day. I'm going to try to get 2 questions in the last 3 minutes before I've got to turn it over. Governor Council, I'm going to try to give this one to you real fast. There's a great question on how can alumni be engaged in D&I efforts, particularly when maybe they're across the globe. I believe you're in St. Louis. So how can alumni help to support D&I efforts at Missouri State when they're around the planet?
I think our foundation has done a really good job of doing a lot of extra activities. And obviously now with this pandemic, we've been able to do a lot of these things virtually. So, be on the lookout for things that come from the foundation. But be aware that we do have universities in China, university programs there. We're celebrating a 20-year with the Lyon University. So that's going strong. And I think anything we can do to help with that, if you're out in another country, just kind of promoting, but we are trying to expand our university programs outward when it comes to, just outside of the United States. But additionally, there are things that, I'm involved with the Maroon Nation Ball, and that's a scholarship opportunity within St. Louis. We have that in Springfield, we have that in Kansas City. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do regionally, as well as from the foundation standpoint. So just if you reach out to somebody that's been there, reach out to me, we'll find something that would be a good fit for you to get involved.
Thank you so much, Governor Counts. And President Smart, when we can travel again, I'm willing to go on the road. Mr. Pratt, this is a real quick one. Someone is asking, in your role as CDO, do you only engage with racial and ethnic minorities, or do you work with other underrepresented groups as well in your position at Missouri State?
Now, we've partnered with Student Affairs, we've partnered with Res Life, we've partnered with just about everybody to address the broad definition for diversity. That definition is in our long-range plan. The division, we champion that along with President Smart's support of including a broad definition of diversity. So just because I am a particular race, which is a social construct, doesn't mean that I'm limited to diversity of folks that just look like me.
Thank you, Mr. Brandon. So again, that original definition we showed of diversity, that reflects on all of the work of our university. It's my pleasure now to turn this part of our panelist presentation over to Lori Fan, who's now going to close out our afternoon. Thank you again, everybody, for being part of today. Thank you. Lori.
Thank you so much, Dr. Foster, and thanks to all of our panelists. It was a really fascinating discussion, and I know I learned a lot about what's happening here in Springfield and across the state with regard to our DEI efforts. So very important topic. I want to, again, thank all of our attendees for joining us today. I encourage you to go to our website, alumni.missouristate.edu, and look for additional alumni and friend activities. Look for our calendar. We are hosting a number of exciting events virtually and hopefully soon in person again as well. And we invite all of you to attend those and share your ideas for future programming as well. Want to also encourage you to look for our next bicentennial event. That will be on Tuesday, May 25th at noon Central Time. And that will deal with the health of Missourians and how we're educating our health professionals here at Missouri State. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. We encourage you. We hope to see you at future events, and happy birthday, Missouri.